What's up, everyone? Welcome to Screen Smash, CouchSoup's gaming podcast. I'm your host, Dan Morris. Joining me this evening, I have Nick McKay.
Whoop. Hi, guys.
Maria Kinunn.
Sorry,
I was doing the Louis.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And joining us completely out of context of what just happened, we have special guest Grover from Whim Indie.
I'm not going to make any weird noises.
Thank you. We already have people that do that, so we don't need any more.
We're covered.
All right. Thank you for joining us this evening, Grover. You, sir, are an indie game developer. So I'm happy that you're able to join us this evening. We're going to get to know you a little bit, and then we're going to talk about something that's kind of hot in the news of gaming right now, and that is the value of games versus their price versus their length and any other metric you want to get into, which I'm sure we're going to go down all sorts of rabbit holes. But first, I would like to give Mr. Grover here a chance to introduce himself, tell us a little bit about himself, and talk about what it's like being an indie game developer. Take it away, sir.
Hi, I'm Grover. I'm the producer and director at Whim Indie. We're an independent game studio. We make all kinds of different games. We've been working on indie games for since 2012, so about 11 years now. So, glad to be on the podcast. We have our game that we just released on Steam last year called Spell Bears. So buy it. We just had a price discount on it. So yeah, so purchase that.
Spell Bears.
Spell Bears. Yes,
Bearers.
That sounds so cool.
Yeah. So if you're a fan
bears. I love bears. So I'm hooked
no,
already.
Spell Bearers, like you're bearing spells.
I think Nick was trying to will it into existence that it
Spell
is
Bears.
in fact Spell Bears.
Spell Bears.
You're giving me ideas.
It's an idea for your next game.
So now you got to make the DLC for Spell Bears.
The Spell Bearer Bears. Spell Bearer Bears. Yeah, but if you like old school games like Smash TV, a little bit of Legend of Zelda, Castlevania, that'll be great. It's 1 to 2 player co-op. You can play online through Steam Remote Play. So,
yes, I've been
we like co-op.
Check that out.
Yeah, awesome.
Yes, indeed. So you've been doing this for about 11 years?
Yes. So I formed the company with 3 of my friends from a mix of high school and college. We formed it. We started a game called Salatria in 2011. That's kind of my take on old 2D Final Fantasy games. We had a lot of voice actors come in and do roles for the characters there. And we released part 1 of the game back in 2016, but we're still working on the full version. And that's going to be released early next year.
Oh, fun.
On Steam and Steam Deck.
So old school Final Fantasy, huh?
Yeah, 1 through 6. Lufia was also a big inspiration for Super Nintendo. Also Breath of Fire, Pokemon, the old Pokemon games before they went 3D. And Paper Mario. I have to give a shout out. One of the lead designers of the game, he loves Paper Mario. Is his favorite RPG, and he put a lot of that essence into the game too.
I bet he's excited for that new Paper Mario RPG remake.
Oh, Super Mario RPG remake. Yeah. So there's 2 designers. One really likes Paper Mario, and one really likes Super Mario RPG. So they're really, really excited. So shout out to both Matt and John on my team. They love both of those series.
Nice. Yeah. Paper Mario and the 1,000-Year Door is one of my favorite GameCube games. So
yeah, it's on Paper Mario's on my backlog. So
yeah.
There's so many games. There's so many games on my backlog that I have to get through, and it doesn't help with all these subscription services and Game Pass and stuff. So
talk about the real life struggle of being a gamer in the 2023, where there's just so many fracking games that it's just impossible to keep up with them all.
Oh yeah.
It's nuts, dude.
I miss the old days. It was easy being like a kid and your parents bought you one game and that was the game you played until your birthday or Christmas. So
Pokemon Gold version, I would just fight the Elite Four and Red over and over again, trying to catch them all. We got so much runtime out of that game.
Yeah. We've talked about it on the offline before too, where I'm like, I used to play through the Lion King for Super Nintendo on repeat, and now I can't beat that game if I try it as an adult. So
I think they re-released it on Switch, right? Under some Disney.
I think
collection.
so. Yeah, I think it was in a collection.
I don't know. Yeah,
something along those lines. I'm curious, like, what was it that like got you and your friends into getting into game development?
Okay, so back in sixth grade, way back before I met any of the people I formed the studio with, I was in these like gifted and talented gate classes, right? And I was a slacker. I did not do my homework at all, and I was just spending my time playing video games. And I would hide and go play Game Boy in like the closet or something. Just when my dad and my brother were looking, right? So I would be, when they would see my grades, they were really low grades. So I would get constantly grounded. So I was like, I'll show you one day, this will be my job, right? He's like, you'll never get anything if you just keep playing these games. I'll make that my job. I want to be a game designer. So I started, when I was grounded, I would start writing out these game designs in sixth grade on paper, and just start writing out storyboards for these characters and what they would do, because I didn't know how to program, right? And when I was in eighth grade, I went to, well, back then, before it was GameStop, it was like EB Games or Funko
old
Land
EB, Electronic Boutique.
Yeah, Funko Land.
Or Baggages.
Really early 2000s. There was this used PlayStation 1 game in the bargain bin. It was called RPG Maker. And it showed this like dungeon master on the cover writing his own game designs on paper. It's like, this is exactly what I'm doing on paper. He's actually making the game and I could buy it on PlayStation. And I begged my dad, please it's $19. It's in the bargain bin, right? And sure enough, and I opened it up on it was a PlayStation 1 thing. It was 2 discs. And I had no idea how any of it worked. And I just sat there for like, all weekend just trying to learn how to program a game on the PlayStation. And it took me about like 2 or 3 weeks, but I was able to, and it's a terrible game, but I figured out how to do it. And so throughout high school, I learned how to do some very rough Visual Basic programming. And then in college, me and one of my best friends, we wanted to major in computer science, and go start making games as a career. I'm sorry if this is getting into a pretty long story.
You're good.
So fast forward 4 years, we graduate, and both me and my friend tried to apply to jobs, and nobody would give us the time of day. So I was like, okay, if we don't get a job by December, I graduated in August. So I get into college with my friend, and we major in computer science. And 4 years later, I graduate in August of 2012, and he graduates in December of 2012. So we're both applying to jobs and things like that, trying to get a start in the game industry. And nothing is biting. Nobody would give us the time of day. So I was like, okay, well, screw it. I had started work on Celatria in 2011 by this point. So it was a year before I graduated college. And I said, okay, if I don't get a job by December of this year, then I'm just going to form my own studio. So that's what I did. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. We turned Celatria into the studio's very first game. And we had an artist I've met some artists online through a game developer association that I was a student member of. And we started making Celatria. My dad had a record store in San Bernardino, California that closed like a year prior, but still owned the property. So we used like a room of that and turned that into like a very small office. And we turned that into a very, very small game studio, and tried to do some crowdfunding and Kickstarter things to pay the bills. That didn't really work out. But after a couple of years, we ended up getting day jobs in the software industry, but we didn't want to stop doing the game studio stuff. So we used some of our salaries to keep things going. And that's how Whim Indie has been going ever since. Since then, we released part 1 of Celatria. In 2016, 2017, we started another game called Spellbearers, which buy it on Steam. Spellbearers, not Spellbearers. We successfully kickstarted Spellbearers. So that was our first successfully crowdfunded game. And through there, I met Chase Bethia at E3. He was a prior guest on your show. Mm-hmm. And he did a special battle theme arrangement in Celatria Part 2, which will be coming out early next year. So, awesome. We have about a small team of about 10 people. It's the three of us founders, and then we brought on a fourth person to help run like the business and marketing side. And then we have a few art contractors and a few music contractors that we work with, and a sound engineer that we work with as well.
Super
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's very interesting
cool.
hearing about how you got started because it echoes a lot of my own past, where I remember as a kid, I used to do doodles and designs of Mortal Kombat characters.
Yeah,
I would do my own Mortal Kombat characters and give them backgrounds and stuff. And I used to do Power Rangers. Like I would do different Power Rangers.
like in the style of like Mortal Kombat 1 through 3 and trilogy.
Yeah, like I used to draw like the ninja outfit and give them different
versus
colors.
screens.
I would give them their own different like backgrounds. I made because I'm a bit of a Godzilla nut, I made a Godzilla Ranger because that's what I do. But yeah.
I've seen stranger mashups in fighting games, so no worries.
Yeah. But also, I know RPG Maker. I also got that game when I was a kid, and I messed around with it for like a day and found it like uber confusing and just like, well, this is cool, but and so
something my team learned about me is I'm very stubborn, for better or for worse. So like, okay, I'll sit there and I'll just like bash my head into it until I figure it out, and it might take me a very long time. And even with a lot of like my friends and family and other people in the studio, it's like, Grover, you've been developing Solitaire for 12 years. I said 5 of those 12 years, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. we didn't have any software to track metrics. We didn't have any plans. I just showed up in an office and we're like, we're working on this today. And come to find out that's the worst way to develop a game. Right. So I did that for 4 years. So, we do things, pretty much like any other software company. Now we do stand-up meetings and all that stuff. And a little bit, honestly, a little bit of the creativity kind of died with that, but there's constant progress, and that's what matters most, right? You can actually see a light at the tunnel. When we were doing experimental, just come in and work on anything you want, and it's still some of the best content we've ever made in the game. But that kind of methodology is unsustainable.
How is the
Oh, good. Go ahead, Nick.
No worries. How is your process with developing games changed in like the last 11 years? So like 11 years ago, how easy was it? How was your process of making a game compared to like now? I can imagine it's changed quite a bit with the new technologies and things like that.
Yeah.
You're still using RPG Maker?
Well, so for Solitaire, Solitaire still uses RPG Maker, but we're pretty much done with that. For Spellbearers, we use Unity. And then for the next game, I'm considering using either Game Maker Studio, it's a different company than RPG Maker. It's done by Yo-Yo Games. They made Deltarune, Undertale. That engine was used to make Deltarune and Undertale, and Hotline Miami. What's the name of that game? Hyper Light Drifter, I think. Yeah. So it's a really great 2D engine tool, but I'm also considering just going to a really big extreme and making a Game Boy game using Game Boy Studio, exporting that as a ROM, plugging it into a Game Boy emulator on Unity. But we'll see. I'm playing with a lot of different other ideas, but I don't want to really commit to much of anything until Solitaire is done. So
good goal.
But with Spellbearers, and we have another game that's upcoming called Delivery Issues, which I kind of have like a really high executive role, but not the co-founder of the studio, Matt. He's more the guy I went to college with that formed the studio. He's in charge of that game, and overseeing the day-to-day production, so I can finish these other games. And that's going on pretty well too. We announced that earlier at Level Up Expo, which is held in Las Vegas.
Oh, nice.
And so, so we got a lot of things going on in the studio. But your question was how has things changed? Not the methodology hasn't changed too much, other than like we have standards and meetings, and when we develop a game from the start, we're like, okay, we are scoping out this many levels, we have this much of a budget. Right. And this is what we can do with this budget. We have to negotiate with artists, and we have to negotiate with our sound engineers and programmers on how much we can, pay them to be able to do things. And from there we make a game. So, Solitaire being the unwieldy 12-year big game that I had to split into 2 parts, right? It's almost 80 hours to complete that game, right? It's for 40 hours to complete part 1, and we're estimating about 40 hours to complete part 2. Completely, we didn't scope that out properly at all. But with Spellbearers, it's the scope is much, much smaller. And instead of having a very, very long game, we have it be where you can play the game on different difficulties for different achievements. So yeah, we definitely keep scope in mind when we come up with games now as opposed to when we started. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely.
I almost went on a tangent. Was that the term?
A tangent.
Yeah.
There you go.
And your game's all released on PC, I'm assuming, yeah?
Yeah. So we always start with Steam and PC first, then we adjust it for Steam Deck, and then we'll come up with a version for Steam Deck. Obviously, RPG Maker is kind of a pain in the butt to release on Steam Deck, so that's taken a lot more time. A big shout out to the developers John and Shadow, who did the programming for Steam Deck and the sound engineering for Steam Deck, because we were using old school MIDI files for our sound for Salatria, and we realized that Steam Deck cannot play MIDI files. So our sound engineer had to re-record the whole soundtrack in the engine and export it in waves, and they estimated it was, that was 100+ songs from both parts of the game. So yeah, and they did their sound engineering magic and made it happen. So shout out to Shadow. They are epic. Yeah.
Very cool.
Is it difficult to make a game for like multiple platforms? Like to sort of export your game and release it on consoles? Would that be difficult? Would it be costly?
Trying to say this without breaking any agreements. Okay, it really depends on the game engine that you do things, right? So game engines like Unity and Game Maker Studio, right? They have exports to different platforms, right? Like PlayStation and Nintendo, but you have to apply to their developer programs and be accepted. And if you get accepted, then you have to sign all these NDAs and things like that. And after that, something happens, and then your game gets released on those platforms.
They have their own like criteria for like quality and standards that you have to meet and make sure that you're checking a bunch of boxes. That's the stuff.
Okay.
Stuff happens. So is it difficult? It really depends on I can answer this part. It really depends on if you develop your game with that in mind. If you've worked on console games before and you know what they expect, you're going to have an easier time. If you've never released a game for console and then you're like, oh, wow, I did not know that they wanted this, then it might be a little bit more difficult. And you have to, from a technical perspective, right? If you design a game and you're designing it for PS5, and you design a game and you're designing it for Switch, right? The Switch is not a PS5, right? You have to do a lot of smoke and mirrors to make things happen. Maybe if Nintendo comes up with a future console, the gap might be a little bit closer together. But we don't know, right? With the consoles that are out right now, you have to, when you come up with your game idea and your game concept, right, you have to figure out what your audience is, right? If you're going to come up with a very cutesy game, you may want to do something for Switch, right? But if you have like these giant open world zones that are seamless, Zelda, and props to Zelda developers, right? They were able to make it happen with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. They have the whole sky, the whole underworld, and the thing, and it feels like it's seamless. But it's a long drop for a reason. They're loading all that stuff as you're dropping in. Mm-hmm. They're loading things up. I was testing with a Korok, right? And I threw a Korok off of the Sky Islands or something like that. I was able to like reverse the rocks going up. I threw it off just to see that if it would remember its location when it fell down to land. And I think after a certain amount, it just disappears, right? And it reloads it. So they do a lot of smoke and mirrors to have things feel like they're seamless, but there's still a lot of loading times in between those screens. So when you develop for something or for lower specs, you have to keep that in mind. And I mentioned Celatria with the Steam Deck, right? We're coming up with a completely different build of Celatria for Steam Deck that doesn't play MIDI files, that adjusts for graphics settings, that doesn't load as many things. And even then, the performance still takes a big hit, even going from PC to Steam Deck. And I know Steam Deck can still play reasonable PS4 and whatnot. But yeah, it's still, if you want to optimize for that, it does require a lot of work.
If you optimize it for Steam Deck, does that make it any easier to go towards like a console afterwards? Or then you get into the muddy area of like, you still have to hit certain requirements?
I would say the Steam Deck, I know people are going to roast me if they take my thing out of context, but I would say like Steam Deck is like the equivalent of maybe right below a PS4 Pro, maybe. So still more powerful, obviously more powerful than a Switch. But it's no PS5. So
still a decent machine.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I have a Steam Deck. I love it. It's great.
Yep. So, yeah. I love it. But yeah, it's still not as powerful as like a PS5, right? Or Xbox Series X.
That's where you do fun things you can do with a Steam Deck, like cloud gaming or streaming to the Steam Deck off of a PS5 or Xbox, rather than actually running the game on the platform itself.
Yeah. I saw that PlayStation was trying to do this like remote thing that you do with your phone, that you attach like this weird controller or something. I was like, geez, at that point, I might as well just play it on Steam Deck.
Yeah, because they're releasing that new controller with a screen in it for the PS5.
Yeah. That did not look well. I don't think I'm going to.
It didn't. I'm a huge PlayStation fan. I'm super loyal, but that thing just looks terrible. Like they're just trying to take the Steam Deck idea. It's like, why?
Just trying to make a Switch. It's like, stop.
Yeah. Well,
for the longest, trying to make a Switch, but it doesn't even disconnect. It's
for the longest time when I was on the go, I would stream my PS4 to my PS Vita and use PS Remote Play that way. But the problem with the PS Vita is it was missing a set of shoulder buttons, right?
Right.
And at the R1 and L1, but R2, L2
touchpad.
Yeah. So I played through Last Guardian like that, but when it came to playing like Final Fantasy VII Remake before they ported it to PS5, it was not. I couldn't do it. It was those necessary buttons were missing.
Yeah, it makes it a little rough on that front. We already kind of like touched on it a little bit, so I think it works nicely for us to transition into our core topic now. But thank you, Grover, for sharing all of that with us. Like that was a lot of really interesting information and learning, and like we all, I think, were relating to it in a lot of ways. Like, oh yeah, I could see how that would work out. I definitely will be sharing Spellbearers, and I'm gonna check that game out. I want to see it because it sounds interesting for sure.
Yes.
But moving on to what we're going to be talking about for our core topic tonight, we're going to get into it's a bit of a hot topic on the internets right now about the price of a game worth its versus its value to you as a player. Be it by its length, its quality, its graphics, what have you. There's so many different ways to look at this, and there's so many different takes. I don't want to like bury the lead here, so I'm trying to like resist saying certain things, but basically this is stemming off of a recent article. You said, I think it's PC Gamer released this article.
PC Gamer.
So PC Gamer did an article about the Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart that released on PC recently, and they were saying that it's not worth the $70 that the game is charging because it's only a 10-hour game, which I'm pretty sure a lot of people would argue that that's not a valid point to make, to say that the game's not worth $70 just because it's only 10 hours long. It is a gorgeous looking game. It's a very fun game. So does that necessarily make it a waste of money? I'm going to throw it out there for everyone here. Grover being our guest, I'm going to toss it to you first. How do you feel on this particular topic?
So the way I feel it, when we released Spellbearers, right? Bearers, we released it for $20 USD, right? And some of the negative comments that we came through, because the game does only take a few hours to beat if you play it on the normal difficulty, if you just want to finish the story. And somebody's like, I don't want to. This is too much for what I'm paying for it. And we've got a few negative reviews about it from there. Our game was also, unfortunately, came out right after Vampire Survivors, right? We've been in development since 2018. And it, when we were developing it, it was like, it would be cool to have a twin stick shooter game where you can shoot hordes of enemies coming around from each of the things. But, none of us ever heard of Vampire Survivors, and having our game come out right after Vampire Survivors, which released, I think, for $5. Yeah. And ours was 20, right? Our game looks a lot more gorgeous than Vampire Survivors. Not gonna gloat there, but Vampire Survivors was more about, it was more about the gameplay than the presentation of it. So, but unfairly or unfairly so, our game got compared to Vampire Survivors, and it was like, oh, it's just it's a cheap knockoff or whatever because it came out right after it, even though we had no idea Vampire Survivors was even a thing. We were just, our timing was unfortunate, right? So where am I going with this, right? $5 versus $20, right? And so we had to adjust our expectations of that. And then, like I said, we recently had to permanently drop the price of it to be a little bit more competitive. But it was because of sentiments like that, right? The game's not worth the amount of money paid for that. As for it being $70, I don't think Ratchet and Clank is worth $70, but it's not because it's a 10-hour game. It's because it came out. I think it came out on PS5. A year or two ago, right?
At least 2 years. I think
games, wasn't it?
2021.
2021, yeah,
something like that. And you see games like they get discounted when they have re-releases or ports or things like that. And I know like Red Dead Redemption was a previous one, but that game was, I think it was like $40 for one console, and then it's $50 on the Switch or something like that.
I definitely want to get into that. So
yeah,
I want to bring up Red Dead, so we'll get there.
We'll get there. Sorry. But good. So it's kind of all over the place, and I don't think people really know how to price it, like a port of a game that came out a couple of years ago, because
I think the problem we're running into here is because Ratchet and Clank is a Sony game, Sony, licensed and produced. I think what they're trying to do since they ported that game to PC was try to do what Nintendo does, where Nintendo just never lowers the prices of their games. They're like, nope,
very rarely.
No matter what, our games are always $50. They're always $60 with each iteration and console and generation going forward. And I think that was Sony's attempt at like, we still expect our premium price for our premium content and our premium product that we're putting out there, whether it's on PlayStation or on PC. But PC players are more used to getting discounts. PC players are used to paying less for their games, even though they might get PCs typically always gets higher quality games too, but they still pay less for them. So I could see where that might lead to some issues.
There's less overhead on PC games, right? Because you don't necessarily have to worry about physical manufacturing, right? Nobody buys physical PC games, right? Whereas you have to worry about the disc manufacturing and all that stuff. All you have to worry about when releasing a game on PC is the different settings, right? The adjusting the different settings, the benchmark, if you will, and making sure that it passes the Steam standards, right? But there's a lot less physical overhead you have to worry about, which is supposed to factor into that $70 price, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that $70 for Ratchet and Clank when it first came out, I would say, yeah, it was worth it. I thought it was a good game. Even if it was short, it was a great game. And also, but to go onto the PC with it being an older game, I kind of agree that I don't think they should be charging the full amount for it. Because on the PS5 as well, it benefited from the haptic feedback. That was a big part of, the mechanics of the game, you had the benefit of having that with the game, and it was mind blowing when I first played it. So I bought it. I didn't feel like it was. I felt like it was worth its money. But you're right. As for being a game that's a couple of years old now, and you're not getting the benefits of haptic feedback, I can see why people are saying I don't think it's particularly worth it. As an old game. But to say the game is not worth it at all for $70 is like, well, how much enjoyment is subjective. How much enjoyment is it worth it for you? It's like I don't play a lot of games.
Way to work on the title of the episode, Maria. Is it worth it?
Is it worth it? Yeah. I mean, I'm one of those people. I don't buy a lot of games unless it's something I'm really excited for. And if I'm really excited for, I will pay $70 for it because that's what I want. But if I'm like, I'll wait for it to drop in price. So it's just, it's subjective. You don't have to pay $70 for it. Yeah. But yeah, I can see why people are like, I don't feel like I should be paying $70 for an old game. That's, that's my salty take.
I think that would be very much my point as well. It's like, I'm not necessarily in a position where I can buy $70 new games every month. So there's a lot of games that I'd really love to play. There's a couple of games on my wish list, like God of War Ragnarok and Gotham Knights, and games like that I'd love to play, but they're still $70. So I don't have the cash for that right now. So I'm just waiting for them to become cheaper. One of the greatest things that came out for me was when PlayStation finally joined Xbox and released their version of Game Pass, because that's tremendous. There's so many games to play there. And I mean, a subscription to that's what, like $10, $15 a month. So I mean, it's really reasonable to pay that per month and have access to so many great games technically for free, instead of playing a game like $70 game that comes out at launch. Because Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is actually on Game Catalog, and I was stoked when a couple of months ago it came out to Game Catalog, because I thought, hey, I finally get to play this game. I'm not going to pay $70 for it, but I finally get to play this game, and I absolutely loved it. So exactly like you said, Maria, I think that Ratchet and Clank 100% worth it at launch for $70. But the fact that it's a re-release on another platform is where it gets a bit tricky, because it is a 2-year-old game, but it is brand new on PC. So like, it's kind of awkward. It's all these remakes and remasters as well. I feel like The Last of Us Part 1, why is that $70?
Yeah.
I mean, that just annoys me. It's like you just remade a game. I
So
understand you had to make a whole new game.
I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole of The Last of Us right now, but I want to touch on something. I want to play devil's advocate here, because every one of you guys keeps mentioning age. Does age determine price? The older a game is, does that make it less value? Does that make it worth less money? Because the contrary is true for classic vintage games now. They're getting more and more expensive to get older games. If a game is 2 years old, does that make it less valuable?
That's a loaded statement, right? We have, you mentioned Quake 2, right? Mm-hmm. Quake 2 was ported by Night Dive Studios, right? Night Dive Studios, their whole business is remastering older games, right? And Limited Run is also doing that, right? They take these older, hard to find games that Shantae, right? That was an old Game Boy game. That skyrocketed, right? But now they were able to port those old Game Boy games to the eShop, to the Steam and whatnot, and now the prices are more reasonable, right? So it's not necessarily. I'm going to add a statement to your statement there and say, well, the older games that are getting more expensive are the ones that are not being ported to current systems, that are not being re-released, that are not coming out to current consoles.
Because they're harder to get, and they're harder to play now.
They're harder to get. It's physical copies, and cartridges degrade, right? I know there's some video game stores that I go to that I'm not going to say which ones, but they do reproduction carts, right? So they'll get the ROMs and stuff and put them onto like Game Boy carts and resell them. And like, oh, hey, here's a Pokemon Leaf Green. It's
for $34 instead of $100.
Yes, yeah. So there are people that are taking it upon themselves to keep physical games alive, even if they're not the originals, right?
Right.
If the big companies are not doing it, the smaller people will find a way. If there's a will, there's a way.
So I'll use that then to segue. Now that you've brought up Red Dead and Quake, there was an article that I recently read that talked about all that went into that Quake 2 remaster, which it had been rumored for a while that there was a Quake 2 remaster coming. And I want to shout out Quake 2 remaster because holy crap, is there a lot in that package. And it was day one to Game Pass on Xbox. Correct me if I'm wrong, the retail price of it is $20 for Quake 2 remaster, I believe. It's also a free upgrade if you own the game on PC. If you own Quake 2 on PC, it's a free upgrade.
I know Limited Run just did. They just started their physical copies.
They did physical prints of it too, right?
Yeah, so that's the one I'm getting because I definitely I don't trust. I want to get it for Nintendo Switch, and I don't trust Nintendo digital copies. If I'll try to get physical whenever I can because I don't know if it's going to carry over the next generation or not, or if they shut it down.
Last I heard, Nintendo said that they're trying to make that a thing where stuff carries over to their next console. But yeah, I feel you. I feel you then.
They have not made a definitive statement. So until they announce the next console, they say that the purchases will carry over, right? They just say, the count information will carry over. That's nothing. That means nothing until.
Yeah, I know. I've been burned by that plenty of times in the past. But anyways, the other side of the coin here was the Red Dead Redemption announcement where they're porting Red Dead Redemption 1 to Switch and PlayStation 4 for $50.
Is the PlayStation version still $50?
Or as far as I've seen, both Switch and PlayStation 4 are going to be $50 for this port. Like I say port kind of with quotation marks and hesitation because there is some evidence that they are doing a little bit to improve the quality on the game, but that's really it. It's not a remaster. It's not a remake. It's not an up-res. It's not an upscale. Like there's some adjustments.
They learned from the Grand Theft Auto trilogy. Well, it's not the same. I know it's Rockstar, but I know Grove Street Games did Grand Theft Auto trilogy, and that was very poorly received. And then I know another team is doing the Red Dead Redemption, being contracted from Rockstar. I forgot the name of the team though. I'll have to look it up.
But it's not a remaster as the Grand Theft Auto trilogy was marketed as a remaster.
Right.
But the thing is, that's really the real kicker here is Quake 2 remaster release, and it's loaded with features. And it even includes Quake 2 Nintendo 64 or Quake 2 64, which is weird to say. So you're getting like an extra game on top of it, and it's fairly cheap. Whereas they want you to pay $50 for a game that came out in 2010 that, like right now, you can play that game on Xbox. It's already backwards compatible. That's why they're not selling it on Xbox, because it's already available on Xbox. And the Xbox version of Red Dead Redemption has already been upscaled for the Xbox series. It's been up-resed. It's been improved. They added it to I think it's got the FPS boost as well. So basically you can play an updated, better version of Red Dead Redemption on the Xbox right now. If you own the game, you automatically get all those features. If you don't own the game, you can buy it for essentially it's $30 for the standalone game, and then it's $10 for the Undead Nightmare pack. But it goes on sale on Xbox all the time. You could get that game for next to nothing on Xbox, and you have the definitive version of the game. Whereas they're charging so much more for these other ports.
So the Undead Nightmare, that's if I'm not mistaken, DLC, that's the DLC.
Right? It's a DLC, yes.
So they're still selling the DLC separate to the base game. Like this just Xbox screams cash grab.
Yeah.
So according to I was just pulled up an article from Kotaku from 2022, and it looks like there was plans for a Red Dead Redemption remaster. But they canceled it because of the poor response from Grand Theft Auto, right?
That makes sense.
Grand Theft Auto 3 trilogy. So, should Red Dead, it was probably just like, okay, they want the originals, let's port the originals, right? As opposed to trying to do all this work for a remaster.
If they had done the remaster right, it would have been a different story.
Mm-hmm.
If they had actually remastered the game, like say Resident Evil likes to remaster their games,
right?
That makes it more worth it. Or even if you did Red Dead Redemption 1 in the Red Dead 2 engine, I think that would be, more worth of the price that they're asking for.
I feel that Grove Street Games, who are the developers behind the definitive edition of Grand Theft Auto, were thrown under the bus because they were asked to do a Grand Theft Auto game by itself is still a very long project on its own.
Right.
And Rockstar tasked them with doing 3 of them at once, right? What I would have preferred would be a Grand Theft Auto 3 remaster release that for $30 with, all the quality of life improvements, but really they take their time on doing that one. Then they do Vice City. Then they do San Andreas. They shouldn't have, because what they did was they did a apply all to all of it.
Yeah,
And then
like
you have
here's up-res textures and then slap on all of it.
But they were given unrealistic timelines, right?
That's fair.
In contrast with Retro Studios, right? Retro Studios, they re-released Metroid Prime. They shadow dropped it, right? On the Switch.
Amazing.
Regarded as one of the best remasters of all time. They still sold it for $40, right? And they didn't do 1, 2, and 3. They didn't do the whole trilogy. They just did 1. Yeah. And 2 and 3 are going to come out because Nintendo's going to probably do some kind of marketing push for the original 3 before 4, right? And it gives the team time to kind of learn how to make a Metroid Prime game before they hop into 4. That's probably why. That's my opinion of why I think it's taken so long, but that's a different topic. But the way they did Metroid Prime 1 and remastered that, excellent, right? They did one game at a time.
They did it right, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's a perfect example.
Would you think that the Red Dead Redemption would be worth 40 instead of 50? Would you think it's a deal then?
Because if they did a proper remaster and sold it for $40, I wouldn't even question it. Because I love that game. It's an amazing game. It's totally worth your time. Like I said, you can still play the definitive version of the game on Xbox now, and it still looks really good. Like it holds up for a 2010 game. And if you play it on Xbox, you get the up-res, you get the boost, and it looks really freaking good on Xbox. Thankfully for me, like I already own the game digitally, so it's just like bang, there it is. I can play it. I can already.
I've never played it, so I'm going to be getting it, but probably when it goes on sale.
Yeah,
but that's not because I don't think it's worth $50. It's because that I have a backlog and I'm not buying any more games.
Yeah, and so you got to be a little bit more savvy.
I got to finish Tears of the Kingdom. Exactly. I need to be a responsible adult for once.
Well, yeah, I absolutely get that. Nick,
I think it's like what we were saying earlier. It's very subjective. Like, is it when you say is it worth it? Is it worth it to you? You know, it's very much that question. Like something I was going to mention earlier about a short game that was still full price was Spider-Man Miles Morales. There was a sequel to the first game. It was very much released as a launch title for the PS5,
right?
And it was full price and is probably half the length of the first game. So you're paying the same price for, half the game. But for me, like that was my only criticism of the game. But for me, I absolutely adored that game. I finished it like 4 or 5 times. I love it. So for me, that price tag is totally worth it. If you're getting a game that you only ever finished once.
Did Miles Morales for PS5 include the original Spider-Man remastered though?
I think if you bought the full,
that was the other thing I was going to mention as well. That was the other thing I was like thinking maybe I should mention is that you can get the Spider-Man, the first Spider-Man remaster, that PS5 upgrade. If you own Spider-Man Miles Morales, you can get that for like, I think it's to do the conversions of these things. I think it's $10. And you can now buy the PS5 version of the first Spider-Man game for $70. Like that's, again, it's like these remasters, like where do you come up with the prices of things and all of that? But it's again, it's like, is it worth the price?
I can totally piggyback on that with my frustration and rage I had where when Ghost of Tsushima came out, I bought the collector's edition of Ghost of Tsushima. I got the full package deal with the PS4. What was it? 6 months later, they released the PS5 version and told me I had to pay $30 for the PS5 version. I'm like, screw you guys.
Oh, that's the worst, dude.
Like
I remember. This is a bit of a tangent, but I remember buying Jedi Fallen Order for like, I don't know, that would be like $20 or something like that. And the very next month there was a PS Plus free game.
You see games like Forspoken.
I was heartbroken.
Forspoken launched earlier this year, $70, right? And people said it's not worth it, And now I see it for like $19.99. The game hasn't been out for like 7 months. It's already degraded.
I say, where are you seeing it for $20? The last I looked, it was still like 40 for a pre-owned copy.
Let me see.
Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on Gotham Knights. The other day, it was on special for 300 Rand, which I think is like $16.
It was on sale at Best Buy here yesterday for $10.
The GameFly.
That came out in October.
Oh, GameFly. Okay. Yeah, it's funny because I was just talking to someone who has a counterpoint on Forspoken and how they think it's absolutely a good game, but it got sucked into this vortex of toxic journalism of people just shitting on it just to shit on it because it was the popular thing to do when it came out. Mm-hmm. And I'm more interested. Like, I actually want to play Forspoken now because I want to know if the game is really as bad as people said it was. Because it seems like it was a trend to just tear that game apart.
To bash it.
Became a meme.
The reason why I didn't like Forspoken from a game designer's perspective, Square Enix has a tendency to tilt their UIs. So when I played the Forspoken, thing, and I think they were trying to make like the status of like Frey look like her watch or her band or something like that. And I was trying to see her levels, but the UI was looking like this, like my hands are. It's like, how do you read text that's like this? It's hard. And like it was just so distorted. I was like, is my TV broken? I don't understand. And I know Final Fantasy VII Remake does it too, with the HP and MP being in the corner like this. And,
it's kind of like off kilter, like the depth of field or depth is a little different.
And I don't like that. That's the only thing I don't like about Forspoken is that they tried to make the UI so edgy, and the UI is meant to clearly convey information. Make the gameplay edgy, make it flashy and whatnot with the attacks and the magic. That's great. Make the dialogue edgy or cringy or whatever, that's fine. But when I can't even see what the levels and the skills that I'm using and I can't read the tooltips, that's where I have a problem. And so I hope, I don't think they're going to fix it now because I think the developer got merged into like a Square Enix business division or something. But I hope that this whole thing of tilting UIs goes away. I don't like it. In Dangent.
And it's just going to be the common term now anytime. So to bring us back around, the whole thing of like the value of a game is very subjective, especially when you could buy a game brand new for full price and you absolutely love it and adore it. Or you're like, wow, I should have waited for this game to go on sale. Or one of my favorite things in the world is to buy a game on sale, not expecting much, and then realize like, holy crap, this game is super good. And I got a great bargain out of it because I bought it on sale. Yeah. Like I could shout out something like I picked up Strange Brigade on Xbox on sale for like $5 and then play the crap out of it because I was like, this is stupid fun.
Cyber Shadow, which was a really, really fun indie game that I played, Yacht Club Games, who did Shovel Knight, they published it. I saw it and I was like, wow, the pixel art on this game looks really, really cool. I routinely on Twitter, people like, what indie game should I play? Instead of saying my own games and be biased, I say, play Cyber Shadow. But I played it and I fell in love with the game. And so, I guess it didn't get a lot of sales or it didn't meet expectations or whatever. But that game has so much heart. And I bought it when it was on sale, right? Like for like $9-10, but it was, I think originally sold for like $19-20. But it was definitely worth the $19-20. But yeah, like you said, there's a lot of games that I don't give a chance, like original IPs or something that I'll wait till it goes on sale. Then I'm like, okay, I'll give it a try. So,
yeah, and I want to say something like I think it was before we started where you mentioned, Nick, about if you're not happy with a game being short, just play it again. And I think there's a truth in that because I think games that are built that way to be short are built to be replayable. Yes. A lot of the times, especially a game like Ratchet and Clank, because I'm going to tell you, like, I love Ratchet and Clank. I have every Ratchet and Clank game and I've played through all those games multiple times. It may only take 8 to 10 hours to beat, but I'm sure as hell going to hit New Game Plus as soon as I finish it and do it again because the games are just stupid fun.
In like games like what do they call them, roguelikes, like games like Hades, right? That's why Hades took off, right? If you play from start to finish, Hades is maybe 45 minutes, but no two people play the game the same, right? They get different powers each room, different bonuses each room. The bosses have to be defeated a little bit differently each time. No two paths are the same, so it's always, I can go back to Hades right now and I beat it like years ago, and I still feel like I would have a fresh, a fun new time,
I mean, that's half of my
Incredible.
issue with like some games are just too long. I don't have enough time to get involved in these really big games. So if the game's a little bit like shorter, I remember back when like Metal Gear Solid, the first one, I played it a ton and repeated it, and now I would play it just to get to certain points so I could just have fun dragging the little snowmen through the things and doing weird shit. You can't do that in games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla because the game's so fucking long. It's just you have to commit an entire week to actually get anywhere. So keeping a game relatively short, it like games nowadays, I find they're not games for playing. It's an investment. You have to invest into it. You're not just playing, but it's just that's the problem with these. It's like I don't mind games being short and being full price if it's a good game and has good playability. But it's just that's my problem. The game's too long and I don't have enough time in my life. And so it's just I mean that's like people were saying is like, is it worth $70 if it's only a 10-hour game? If you enjoy it, yeah.
I guess it depends on if that metric is what's important to you. Like, do you get more enjoyment out of the game if it's longer? Purely if it's longer, because then that's why we get bloated, overly long games, because you're the person that wants a game that just keeps you around as long as possible. You're the reason we have Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey and Valhalla, and they're 1,000 hours long. And it's like, I just miss the old days of playing through Assassin's Creed 1 or 2 in like 20 or 30 hours and not have to worry about a bunch of side quests for no reason that have people farting themselves. That was a Valhalla mission that I remember, just like something where somebody had gas. Anyways.
Or it's just like these filler moments in games. Like I noticed like, the free roaming element. It's like, oh, you have to get on a horse and walk across the map. It's like, we don't have any content, so we're going to waste time pretending this game is bigger than it actually is because you have to walk across the map rather than just get there. So it's you're putting fluff and filler in games and saying, this is a $70 game. Yeah.
When you're pushing across the corridor to hide the loading times.
Yeah.
The squish holes, the squeeze holes.
Yeah. So we can't come up with any actual content for this part. So we're going to give you a horse and you have to walk across the whole fucking map. So it's just to make it feel like bigger than it is.
But I know Final Fantasy 16, if you guys have played that, they do a little bit of that, right? They force you to walk while the characters have dialogue while they're walking through the zone, because the zones aren't necessarily too big. So if you were to just run while they're doing it, the conversation might end. So they force you to walk. And they talk while doing it.
I hate the forced walk and talk moments, but it depends. Some games do it okay. Some games are terrible. Like we've talked about the walk and talk moments on this podcast before, and I specifically called out a few games for that. And like one of my most hated ones was The Last of Us 2. God damn it, let me do other things while they're talking to me. Don't make me just sit there and like that's the thing that's like it feels like a playable cutscene where I just have to hold up to play cutscene. Just be a cutscene or just let it happen. I don't make me sit there and hold up to walk through those moments. Like that's the most obnoxious thing to me because then I'm drilling my thumb into the thumbstick. Like
take notes, Grover.
It becomes an interactive what do they call it? QTE or something like that.
Oh, I hate those so much.
Real quick, because we got to wrap up here in a minute. There's one last thing I wanted to throw out there as far as like game value and whatnot. And I bring this up on purpose for two reasons. Maria is a big Destiny player. And I know you, Grover, play Final Fantasy 14. Yes. How does this apply to MMOs that have paid for expansions?
Are you talking about that meme? So Final Fantasy 14 did that free trial that they expanded it another expansion. So the meme going on is like you could play the first two expansions for free now, but they originally cost money. I think at some point for online persistent online games, right, you have to capture a type of audience. I'm just going to keep going this time. You have to capture a type of audience that has never played the game and that was never going to consider the game, especially for a game as old as Final Fantasy 14, which is like 10 years old at this point, right? The people who wanted to buy it have already bought it, right? And now they have to go for a new sector of people that okay, I'm bored. Let me give this a try, right? There's some of I have friends that will never pay a subscription for anything, right? But when they see, oh, I can play 2 Final Fantasy games for free, then I'm happy that they're joining, and I pay a subscription, so I don't, nothing off my back.
They're
right?
removing that barrier of entry that keeps a lot of players out of it initially.
Yeah. And personally, I hope it keeps going, right? It's what, like the paying subscriber base, right? They'll always have like this window that just always moves, and the free tier will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and more people will keep playing. And you always have, people will always have content and stuff to do, because eventually those people that are playing are going to level up and not going to want to do the older content. So you always have to have. And for a game like 14, it thrives on having those dungeons fill up with people, right? There's some 24-man content that can't be done. The mechanics do not allow it to be done with less than a certain group of people, right? So, it's so for persistent online games, I think it's the importance to have people constantly playing it is more vital than my thing being like, oh, I paid $60 for this 5 years ago and now it's free, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, with me, I'm not subscribed to anything, so I choose to pay like each time a new DLC comes out because I want that content. It's worth it for me. I know I'll pay, $70 for the new DLC Destiny expansion, but I know I'm going to play it for like 6 months every day, so to me, it's like, if it's going to give me that much enjoyment, then, it's worth it for me. The same thing with like paying $70 for a game. If it's going to give you that much enjoyment and that's what you want, other people will be like, you're nuts. Well, sorry. Huh. It's basically my crack. So I'm just kind of like, Destiny. Yeah, give me the play.
That kind of sounds like your it sounds like your rewind sound a little bit.
Yeah. So to mirror what you said about the Final Fantasy 14 meme, I'm the person that spent $100 on Destiny 2 when it came out for the premium edition that came with a full game plus the first 2 expansions, add-ons. All of that content went free, and now it's gone. You can't play it anymore. You can't even access it. I paid money for it, and you can't get it anymore. It's just gone.
That's so mean.
Did that happen to Overwatch 1 players too?
Yeah, Overwatch 1 doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a little salty about that because they took away the content that I paid for.
Well, that happened with the original Final Fantasy 14, right?
The original, yeah.
And I was there. They just dropped a whole meteor on the thing, but they they rebuilt the game, right? But the original game does not exist anymore, other than like fan servers or whatever. But same thing. But they compensated us with the free version of the new one, right? So, but.
So to close this out, lastly, Nick, I want to give you a chance. How do you feel about like paid on DLC or live service games that expect you to continue to pay for them?
I have my own bad experiences with live service or online gaming in general. So I've never really been a part of a game that's had like paid expansions that I have personally kept paying for. I mean, I think the closest thing I've really come to is like maybe Apex Legends, just sort of buying the battle pass every new season and things like that. And it kind of, I've had such a love-hate relationship with the game, which is just a hate-hate relationship now. But I like the idea of, what I wanted to see from Marvel's Avengers was a game that released that was decent. And then, they said they were going to release new expansions, new missions, new characters. And I thought this is really cool. The idea of paying for a full good game and then getting extra things released, as time goes. It's such a cool idea, but it's got to be affordable. If you're going to do that, I don't think you can release a game at $70 and then have like really expensive expansions. I think it's got to be really cheap. And I think Marvel's Avengers, all of those expansions, if I'm not mistaken, they were all free. Which I agreed with. I was like, that's cool, because then you're not paying for all this extra stuff. I think the only reason it was free was because the game was shit and no one was playing it.
Was that the one they were keeping Spider-Man as like their secret long-term character or something?
He was the Sony exclusive, actually.
Oh,
that was their trump card, and he plays worse than like the PS1 Spider-Man game. It's so bad.
Oh no!
But I love that idea. I always wanted to get into Destiny. and I just haven't got around to it because I really don't like playing online games because of matchmaking systems and things like that.
Well,
but I like the idea of like saying
basically by yourself. You can do what
That's
Maria
what I
does.
do.
Maria plays by herself. She doesn't play with other people.
Yeah, that's what my friends keep saying. They're like, "Oh, but there's PvE, dude. You don't have to play against other people." I'm like,
I don't give a shit about any of that. I just play by myself. You can do it.
The PvP
You don't need friends.
stuff in Destiny is basically dead at this point, anyways.
Yeah.
But I like that idea of saying like, "Hey, we're gonna keep this game going and release stuff." But it's, I don't know. I feel like it needs to be affordable because not everyone can afford to spend a crap load of money on one video game every month.
To close this out, I have one thing I want to shout out: the games that will include a option to like you can buy like a premium edition of the game, and then it says you will also get the DLC when it comes out, and it's expected to be turned out by the end of this time next year, essentially. And
like
I want to
season passes.
Well, they used to
Like
be season
pass,
passes. They used to do season passes, but the season
Borderlands
pass
used to do that.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Well, most recently I bought Remnant 2. Remnant 2 released for $50. They did a deluxe edition of Remnant 2 for $70, which includes all future planned DLC that they say will come out by the end of next year. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to throw down an extra $10 to know I'm going to get that content over the next year beyond the base game. That's fine with me. Like, I like when games do that kind of thing to like, give us a little extra money and we'll make sure you're going to get the future content when it drops. And they might charge more for that content when it does release.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like the season pass was always really cool, but it's kind of just, it's sort of fallen by the wayside because they'll be like, oh, you get a season pass for season 1. And then there's season 2 and that's what Borderlands does. Like I got the season pass for the DLC for Assassin's Creed Syndicate. And I loved that because then it just says all of the DLC on the store, just every single thing you can just add and download. I love that. But when it's like, oh, season 1's season pass, and then there's like season 2, 3, 4, 5.
They just play on your FOMO,
Yeah. Because now it's just battle passes and things. Those are different than what the old season passes were.
Well, the thing of Pokemon, right? The Pokemon Switch games, I won't even touch them until the DLC comes out. Because I feel like I'm playing incomplete games at the launch, so I'll just wait. I have so many games in my backlog, and then when the DLC is out, then I'll play the complete game. So I don't mind waiting until a little bit later, especially with how big my backlog is at the moment.
It's funny because you say complete, and it's like a lot of times those games that come out with DLC will then repackage the game with the DLC and call it the complete edition. Like, oh, okay.
Yep. A lot of the Switch ports of the games do that, right? I think The Witcher 3 did that, right? When they came out on the Switch, it came out with all the DLC up to that point. Same with Skyrim, repackaged in a nice little bundle.
Yeah, but we need to close it out tonight. Thank you so much, Grover, for joining us for this discussion. The topic is going to be a hot one no matter what. It's an endless topic. I say that. And all my time with games and my time like working within the industry, like selling games, covering games, people have always questioned the value and the price. And if you think back, like games on the PlayStation 1, Nintendo 64 used to be $50. Then they got priced up to $60. Now they're trying to get up to $70. Like that's just the way the world works. Stuff is getting bigger and more expensive. The game's price is always going to be subjective to what you get value out of as a player. And I didn't want to mention it, but I have to throw it out there. Like I got Vampire Survivors and I put days into that game.
Yep.
Days for $5, if that, because I played it on Game Pass. So nothing against your guys'.
No. None taken. It was just fortunate timing. I have nothing against the devs of Vampire Survivors. It's a really great game.
Yeah, and you can't go wrong with just great gameplay that keeps you around. But yeah, that's going to do it for us here tonight on Screen Smash. Thank you, Grover, for joining us and sharing with us your story. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Nick. Be sure to like and subscribe CouchSoup and go to couchsoup.com to check out all the coolest articles and content we have over there. Plus, listen to or watch this cool podcast. We will see you guys all next week. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.